What if your property could earn steadier income with fewer turnovers while still leaving flexibility for your own use and align better with your community? That's the promise of what a midterm rental model can do. In this discussion, I'll walk you through what a midterm rental is, how it works, and why it might be the fit that you've been looking for. Let's start with the basics. What is a midterm rental? A midterm rental is a lease that falls between short-term and long-term. Typically, that means leases from around 1 to 6 months, though in some markets, up to 9 or even 12 months. It's often fully or mostly furnished, with utilities included or at least simplified, so the tenant doesn't have to deal with setting up accounts for a short period of time, or you can share utilities. The lease structure tends to be flexible, monthly renewals or quarter-to-quarter renewal with notice periods built in. And it's more formal than a nightly stay, but less locked in, say, than a 12-month lease. Contrasting that with the other models, you have, for example, a short-term rental, which is typically under 30 days. It's furnished, and it tends to serve tourists or short-term travelers. It has a high turnover and lots of management. A midterm rental, as we said, is typically 1 to 6 months. It is furnished or semi-furnished, and it tends to serve relocators, traveling professionals, remote workers, has a moderate turnover, fewer guest level operations. And then you have a long-term rental, which is typically 12 or more months. It can just really even be over 6 months because the tax structures in the United States typically change when you get over 6 months. You don't have to charge that lodging tax typically. It's usually unfurnished in a long-term lease, or at least minimally furnished. And people are setting in for a while. You've got low turnover, more stability. This structure gives you breathing room. And when you have a good fit, it can be a really nice autopilot mechanism for reliable income. You do have to check local zoning and whether or not you have any homeowner association rules or whether there's any landlord-tenant laws to be sure your lease structure is allowed. But it's good to look at as an option, and that doesn't have to be a dense or difficult process to wade through. So let's move into what really matters. Why would you choose a midterm rental as a host with one property? This is about lifestyle and fit, as well as community alignment. So for example, a midterm rental can offer stability without stagnation. Short-term rentals can flood with bookings, but they can also crash with seasonality. Long-term leases can lock you in and limit your ability to use the property yourself. Midterm rentals give you predictable income and fewer gaps without full lock-in. They can also be a great complement to a short-term rental season if that's limited to certain months of the year. In a midterm rental, tenants stay for months rather than nights, so you reduce the frequency of turnovers, you reduce the cleaning churn, and the whole guest onboarding and checkout process. That means less stress and more time. And it can also align with community and housing context. For example, midterm rentals occupy a unique zone. They can act less like tourist housing and more like housing in service of transitions for people who are relocating, professionals on assignment, or those between homes. That positions your property as contributing, not just extracting from the local community. That garners cooperation. You're offering a bridge in the housing ecosystem. You're not competing directly with the long-term housing stock. That's a core piece of the Mindful Rental Pros approach. Rentals that integrate, not try to dominate or disrupt a community. Another reason that they can be really valuable is that you get different tenants, right? There's lower friction. Midterm rental tenants tend to be more stable, respectful, and lower risk than nightly guests because they tend to be professionals who need consistent housing. They might be traveling nurses, consultants, remote workers, or relocating people. They're less likely to throw parties or demand 24/7 service because they treat their stay more like a home than like a vacation or a party venue. So that reduces stress on the part of guest management. And from a risk mitigation and regulatory safety standpoint, if your city cracks down on short-term rentals or imposes strict regulations like permits, added taxes, caps, or occupancy rules on rentals under 30 days, medium-term rentals often slip through more easily because they're not in that category of operation. And there's less wear and tear, less maintenance, and fewer unexpected costs because you have a smoother, less churned operation. you can get increased flexibility for your life and your goals because midterm rental leases are shorter than long-term rentals, and you can retain the ability to shift your strategy. You can use the property yourself occasionally. You can experiment, you can respond to market shifts, but also matching the right rental type to your lifestyle and your comfort with risk and your community's culture is part of that choice. Midterm rentals really are truly that middle ground. So if you've been running a short-term rental and you feel like you were always chasing guests and worrying about slow nights and increased competition and juggling check-ins and cleaning, you might consider pivoting to a midterm rental. Your property can now be rented for 3 or 4 months at a time. You spend less time scrambling, less interaction or demand on your time, then you might gain increased peace of mind, steadier income, and a more sustainable rhythm. That's really what the transformation is of midterm rentals, if it's a good fit for you. So let's answer a few of those questions. Do I lose revenue compared to the maximum nightly rates that typically happen with short-term rentals? In most cases, the per night yield might drop. It's offset by fewer vacancy days, though, lower turnover costs, and less hands-on management. In many markets, midterm rentals beat long-term rent and can beat short-term rentals over time as well. So how do you even find midterm rental platforms? If you want to advertise as a property rental owner, how do you do that? One well-known platform is Furnished Finder. Another one that's up and coming is called Mini Stays. And then you might also find that even just Airbnb and VRBO are getting in on the act of midterm rentals because it makes sense in so many markets where there's pushback on short-term rentals and where people want to stay longer in places where they're trying to immerse in the experience or move. So these platforms that are oriented to longer stays or even local hospital systems, relocation firms, corporate housing, and universities are good places where you might find prospects or you might want to list your property so that they can find you. So is furnishing and maintenance expensive? Certainly not. If you've already been operating as a short-term rental operator, if you already have a short-term rental, it's not going to be any more than what you're already doing. And with longer term stays anyway, you're spreading any new costs over a longer period of time. So, what about gaps between tenants? Some gaps are inevitable. You can mitigate by overlapping marketing, flexible check-in and check-out times, and having small buffer in reserves. What about local issues in terms of legality and code and insurance? You have to check that anyway for any kind of rental. You need to understand what code is, you need to understand what's legal, and you need to talk to your insurer about landlord insurance. This is different than homeowners insurance. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a CPA, and obviously I'm not a code enforcement officer. So you've got to check with those local authorities, but those are I's you want to dot and T's you want to cross in whatever kind of rental you're doing, because it just doesn't make sense for you to put an asset of this scale at risk of some kind of backbite in the future if you just don't follow through on the important issues that you need to. So midterm rentals are really about fit. Ask yourself, does your local market have demand? Is there a hospital nearby? Are people relocating to the area? Is there seasonal work? Are there corporate roles? Is the regulatory climate favorable or ambiguous toward rentals over 30 days? And what's your tolerance for turnover versus, the rigid need to have something locked in either short or long-term rentals? How much time do you want to spend managing your property? Because midterm rentals can require a lot less turnover, a lot less management than short-term rentals do. And how important is it for you to use the property yourself for family or for vacation? Because midterm rentals provide that opportunity, as do short-term rentals, whereas long-term really don't. So if your answers kind of lean toward a balance or a mix or a steady income and, being a respected neighbor, midterm rentals often hit the sweet spot. You don't have to pick one model forever. Remember, you can pivot. Many hosts run hybrid system, maybe short-term rental during the peak season, and midterm rental in the shoulder season, or long-term rentals if they are looking for stability without churn. Midterm rentals can provide an opportunity for you to consider the best way that might fit your lifestyle and your goals, as well as your community. If you're not sure really what might be your best fit, take our quiz on which rental type is best for you and consider downloading our guide, Why Pivot to Another Type of Rental. That could also be an opportunity to consider whether midterm rentals are a good fit for you.